Hola, welcome to everyone. It's great to have all you here with us this afternoon in Brazil. I'm Erica. I'm a PhD student at the graduate program of the linguistics at Federal University of Santa Catarina. And I will moderate this presentation today. The annual conference of the International Association for the Integrational Study of Language and Communication is being hosted by the graduate program of linguistics at Federal University of Santa Catarina and the research group of critical language policy and planning. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to our speaker professor. Daniel Silva is a professor of social linguistics and pragmatics at Federal University of Santa Catarina. He also collaborates in the graduate program in applied linguistics at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and is a productivity scholar at the Conselho Nacional de Desenvolvimento Científico e Tecnológico, CNPq. His fieldwork focuses on language, violence, and inequality in Brazil. His research interests are language commodification, circulation of discourse, symbolic violence, and communicative inequity. In 2017, he edited the volume Language and Violence, Pragmatic Perspectives by John Benjamin Publishing. In 2020, together with Jerry Lee, he published the piece Marielle Presente, Metalapses, Temporality and Enrichment of Hope in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, on which this talk is based. The title of the talk for this afternoon is What does the mourning and justice movement for Marielle Franco teach us about language ideology and temporality? Before giving the floor to the professor, I would like to remind you to write your questions in the chat, as they will be read later. Antes de passar a palavra ao professor Daniel, gostaria de lembrá-los que escrevam suas perguntas no chat em português, que elas serão lidas e respondidas em português também. So, Professor Daniel Silva, please, now it's with you.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Beatriz, and everyone who's putting this conference together. It's such a pleasure to speak to a Brazilian and an international public around the theme of integrationism. I was trained by someone who's very close to this paradigm, Professor Rajan Kanavili Rajagopalan. And I mean, I wish we were all gathering together in Florianopolis, this time of the year, it's warm. But unfortunately, we have to do it now online. And well, luckily we have these devices, these technologies to make it possible. So I want to, thank you all for being here. And I am, I'm expecting a very pleasant time with you. I'm gonna share my screen with you. So as Erica said, my talk is based on a paper that I published recently with my colleague, Jerry Lee. And I am translating the ideas in this paper and in this collaborative project with my colleague in terms of this one question. What does the mourning and justice movement for Marielle Franco teach us about language, ideology, and temporality? Which are the two basic aspects that we look into Marielle's performance and also in the mourning movement that surfaced around her death. I'm gonna unpack all the events associated with Marielle and also who Marielle is, but I just wanted to make clear what are the two basic questions I want to address today. So I am treating Marielle as an emblem of hope, and I also want to point that she was connected to my networks in Rio de Janeiro, where I do fieldwork. I do fieldwork in a group of favelas known as Complexo do Alemão. So it's a complex group of 12 favelas in the north region in the city of Rio. And Marielle is from the Complexo da Maré, which is another group of favelas, which is geographically and politically close to the Alemão. So we have here some people from fieldwork, and Marielle is among them. And you have pictures of kids and their mothers allowed me to share this picture. So in this picture, you have with like holding the kids, my friend Adriana Lopes, who's a partner in the fieldwork with Miguel and Teresa, and Marielle is holding Adriana Facina's son, Raul, and all the other people around in a very happy, pleasant moment. So Marielle was like this. I met her a couple times. She was, I mean, whatever people say, progressives say about her as being this, icon of, joy and and hope is fits a lot with her image. Well, unfortunately, she died at a very young age 39. She I have a small problem with some sentences here, so I have to show it like this. So Marielle, just to give you a very brief biography, she was a queer Black woman from the Complexo da Maré. Before becoming a Congress, a councilwoman in Rio, she had been an aide to now federal representative Marcelo Freixo, but at the time he was a state representative in Rio. So together they designed human rights policy, and they also confronted militias, which are the military groups who unofficially control some favelas. And I mean, as I'm gonna say in a second, Marielle's murder is connected to the militias. So she started her solo career, so to speak, in 2016 when she decided to run for the city council. I mean, it was a very humble campaign. She didn't expect to be elected, but she received an expressive number of votes, 46,000 plus, being the fifth most voted council person in the election, and the only one Black woman to be elected to the House that has 51 positions and only 7 women. So we start to see the gender inequality in politics in Rio. I hope to be able to show the other. So 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago, she and her driver were assassinated in an ambush. The sniper, Ronnie Lessa, used this, very elite possessed submachine gun, which is not owned by common criminals. It belongs in the army, and it was smuggled into his group. And he was a former military sniper. And Rony Lessa lives, I mean, now he's in prison, but he lives in the same condominium as Jair Bolsonaro does in Rio. So, and they had connections. Also, another militiaman who is suspected to be involved with the crime. This man, Adriano da Nóbrega, was assassinated in a very suspicious act 2 years ago, was also connected to Bolsonaro's family. So, I mean, we have very, very strange connections. I don't want to make any very evident, ostensible connection, but we have strange relations here. So far, 3 years ago, we don't know who commissioned the murder nor the reasons. We only know that Juan Lessa was the one who was in the car and shot, and also the driver. And there is a lot of pressure from human rights groups around the world and in Brazil, and a very strong mourning movement that I want to unpack a little bit. Um, that's pushing pressure, putting pressure into this, but so far the police have not cleared, and there is no formal accusation of a suspect of commissioning this murder. This murder. Um, so I've been working with this my colleague Jerry Lee around this notion of social linguistics of hope. We're based mostly on Jonathan Lear's famous important book about radical hope among the Crow, an indigenous group in the north of the United States. But we also draw from other authors, both in philosophy and also in the social sciences and sociolinguistics. So just to define it very briefly, the sociolinguistics of hope is a language ideology. So it's a mode of connecting social processes and forms of talk and forms of using language. And we understand that it operates, that it takes place in spaces where people face conditions of uncertainty, of precarity, of violence. Um, so in sociolinguistic terms, when people engage with hope, they tend to project language in ways that oppose precarity, and especially so they oppose despair. This is Aristotle's point about the virtue of courage that scholars have connected to hope in many senses. Aristotle is also famous as having defined hope as a waking dream. And Jonathan Lear, who's an Aristotelian philosopher himself, also spells out this very basic characteristic of hope, which is a mode of engaging with practical reason and with practical resources, language included, to oppose despair, which is a paralyzing effect. So how do language users engage with hope? For example, by reimagining authority, temporality, cooperation, and the access of linguistic resources. And interactionally, hope is, as I said, a mode of avoiding despair by means of semiotic work that produces alternative forms of language, time, sociality, and forms of life. As I don't have all the time possible here, today as I said, I will engage with these two forms of reimagination, of temporality and of sociolinguistic resources of language ideology. So as Erica said, this talk is based on the paper that is out in the Journal of Sociolinguistics. I invite you to read and to circulate it. So we have before us a case of violence, that is the assassination of a Black queer coastal woman from the favela who was also a mother. And we have a situation of uncertainty. So it's just 3 years that Marielle was murdered, and we still don't know who ordered it and what are their reasons for that. So I'm gonna focus on three vignettes, on three cases around Marielle's performance, and also around the mourning movement's performance of fighting for justice for Marielle, and of working on mourning. You know, I'm trying to use the expression, I don't speak German, but I know that Freud spoke of the work of mourning, you know, so it's an elaboration of loss that is also a transformation of love. So when you mourn for someone, your love for that person, which can be for a place, for, you know, a condition, etc., is transformed, and it's a transition. So I've been with Jerry interested in how this transformation is enacted by the mourners. So this first case, I want to be brief here, it became very emblematic, but it's a speech that she gave at the plenary session a few days before her murder on Brazil's Women's Day, which is on March 8th. So many council members were speaking at the tribune, and Marielle, being a woman, being a queer Black woman, left-oriented, etc., this had many sparks and friction in the House. So she was interrupted many times during this address of 16 minutes. And I want to focus on how she rescaled, how she responded to these interruptions. So here we have some points in the interaction that I want to single out. So she is, I mean, speaking of democracy, etc., and a councilwoman, a councilman, some random councilman that I didn't identify, came to handle flowers to her. She doesn't know what's going on, etc. And she sees this man coming to her, and she asks, "How are you, councilman?" And he says, "Happy Women's Day, Feliz Dia das Mulheres." Then a few seconds, she thanks him, etc. Then a few seconds, another councilman, now identified, Italo Silva, approaches the pulpit, bringing a flower, and she's already wary about it. And she's like, "You're not interrupting me now, are you?" And he says, "Oh, it won't take long." And he then gives the flowers for her. "I'm doing my part in your day." And then Marielle responds, "But it's a man behaving as a man, my dear God." "Thank you, Italo." And he says, God bless you." She responds. And then there is a third interruption that I want to single out here, which is from an unknown person in the audience. When Marielle is talking about murders of women in Rio, etc., and numbers of rapes. And then this one man yells a reference to Ustra, Go Ustra, who was a torturer during the dictatorship, and who's a man that our current president admires and has paid many homages during many tributes during his time as a congressman. So Marielle, I mean, takes a few seconds for her to realize what's going on, to process what she had just heard. Then she resorts to the bureaucratic procedures, asking the president of the session to stop the man from interrupting her talk. But she adds, I won't be interrupted. I won't stand any interruption from any council members in this house, and I won't stand the interruption of a citizen who comes here and does not know how to listen to an elected woman and president of the Women's Commission in the House. She's greeted with many applauses, etc. So I want to work out with you about this situation a little bit. So, I mean, interruption isn't per se a problem in interactions. It varies culturally. Sometimes people are engaging in a conversation with enthusiasm and someone else interrupts to help whoever is speaking, etc. So some studies point that we need to look at the metapragmatics of the interaction, how people speak about what's going on, how they, point, whether they're, uncomfortable about it, etc., to understand interruption as a problem, so to say, or as an infringement of one's speaking rights. Marielle indicates that she is uncomfortable about it and that she's understanding the interruptions as males interfering into her rights of being a speaking subject, female speaking subject. And it's very interesting, the politics of it, because she rescales these interruptions onto the grounds of the struggle for economic redistribution and identity recognition. I don't have time to unpack this, but I refer you to Nancy Fraser's pioneering work about these two poles of social justice. Sequentially, the three interruptions point to different ways in which Marielle reinscribed, these interruptions into chronotropes of political action. Okay. So in the first interruption, she just responds by saying "obrigada," thank you. Then she clearly shows irritation because Sibas handing the flowers invokes sexist and LGBTQ um, negative history. And the third interruption is the time when she, just scales that to struggle for democracy in Brazil because the man was interrupting her to pay tribute to a torturer. So it's very interesting how Marielle, in her parliamentary action, understood her own trajectory as something that is not her own. So, all the politics I'm commenting of, her handling of interruption is connected to, a very rational way of engaging with politics in which she understood herself as a member of a larger group of Black women who came before her, who are at the present around her, and who will come next. So it's very interesting. She just, minutes before being murdered, she gave a speech at the Casa das Pretas, the house of the Black women in Rio. And she says that my trajectory and my individual condition cannot be only an individual condition. For long before this mandate of a year and a few months, other Black women had paved the way and others will have to come. And that's exactly what happened after her murder. So her, phrase, "I will not be interrupted, não serei interrompida," traveled to the protests around Brazil and around the world after Marielle was assassinated. So we have here a banner from these protests. Um, Her party, political party, the PSOL, also created many, pieces of art for the national elections that came months after her murder, in which these words were also, emplaced and textualized. Here we have the Marielle Franco stairs, the escadarias Marielle Franco in São Paulo, where you have, the face of black women and some, folklore icons like a mermaid and, indigenous women, and also the phrase "não serei interrompida" is there on the right hand side of the stairs. And here we have a poster, Marielle não será interrompida, at a protest in Rio de Janeiro. Okay, so I have two other cases. I'm running out of time, so I will have to be a little bit brief. So I spoke about rescaling of, a moment of interaction into a broader scenario and how that traveled through protest. Now I wanna also look at Marielle's rescaling of time, but especially how the movement itself rescaled temporality. I'm trying to understand temporality as the way of perceiving and living time in a form of life. And I'm also working with this sort of, figure of speech, metalapses. I'm going to explain it briefly in a second. So as soon as Marielle was murdered, we heard and we still hear 3 years from now, from that point, Marielle presente, Marielle is present, Marielle vive, Marielle lives, and Marielle is a seed. And we also have this beautiful cartoon by Quinho that gives a semiotic representation of this idea of Marielle being a seed and flourishing after dying, so to speak. So Metalapses as a figure, a narrative figure, a speech figure, is understood as the transition from one narrative level to another. So a good example is, for instance, when a character leaves the screen and meets the viewer. We see that in film, we see that in novels, etc. So that's a metalapsis. So it's an extrapolation of one narrative level to another. But it's interesting that Judith Butler is very famous for that, because Butler understands metalapsis as a temporal mode that is engaged in a very production of subjects. So she writes that metalapsis is a belated temporality by which the subject who cites the performatives temporarily produces the belated and fictive origin of the performative itself. So it's her logic of citation. I say I am Daniel, but it happens that before me, my mother and my father baptized me as Daniel. So I'm citing that performative event. But I'm also, when I say I'm Daniel, I'm positioning myself as the origin of that. So there is some extrapolation of one temporal mode into another, or one narrative level into another, so to speak. An ordinary I am Daniel from the baptismal one, from my fathers and the priest or the judge, whoever. So there is this temporal mode of reinscription. So, I mean, there is data of mourning speaking about this metalapsis. So Imani, who was an aide to her mandata, spoke about her being a seed. I have to rush a little bit, but it's very interesting in this interview we conducted with Imani. She's speaking about, I asked her, so what does it mean to speak about Marielle as being present among you, about this metalapses? Because she is reinscribed as a hero, as someone who's not biologically here, but as a, a heroic form, a martyr form is belong people. So Imani says, well, it's hard for me to talk about Marielle in the present because I feel her here all the time. I feel her present, even if in fact spiritually. We should stop saying Marielle presente because she must go, she must rest. But it's very difficult for me because she is literally very much among us, right? She made herself body, she made herself presence, she made herself communion, she tells the world. So, I mean, it's very interesting this way in which Marielle from the other world is uh, the presence of politics and how she's telling the world. This sociolinguistic connection is also very interesting. Okay, so the third case, I'm afraid I don't have much time. So it's about Papajeto, which is register. It's a form of enregisterment, as Sifaga says, a mode of crystallization of forms of talk that become, ritualized as a register across time. And it's also a form of translation. Papajeto is, say, it's a trope in the favelas, and it's very common when people need to fix a problem. They say, I will give you a papo reto, eu vou te dar papo reto, which means I will render the conversation in the easiest, in the most direct way, because I want these problems to be fixed. But it also has a political meaning because Marielle herself used this colloquial trope and this colloquial register, so to say, in politics, which is very interesting. So we have a citation here from a feminist seminar in 2017 when Marielle says that about her conflicts, and the frictions in the house. She says, in this limbo, we don't want to let go of our origins and maintain the center while engaging in dialogue and debate with them on the same level, yet there is a modus operandi that is proper and resorts to ariania. It's a neologism for white supremacism that isn't in Papo Reto, that won't sort out the questions, the polemics. So she understood that, this convoluted talk of bureaucracy works to stop the poor from having access to resources, to democracy. So Papo Reto was also a way of, trying to engage in different forms of conversation. So to conclude, Marielle's Papo Reto did not only mean translating into non-standard norms the terms of debates commonly enunciated in the standard, or did it simply mean the collaborative access to other linguistic resources, such as English or linguistic bureaucracy? It meant that all this could be performed by a Black lesbian woman from the favela who, in performing these translations and collaborations, exceeded her speech at a time when individuals like her do not normally occupy decision-making spaces. For Imani, Marielle carried on her body the marks of what ought to be said and how that should be said. So my partial conclusions are that this mourning movement is grappling with practical reason, with temporality, in these three different senses, the ways that não serei interrompida, I won't be interrupted, which is, about the temporality of a conversation, how that's rescaled into other political realms. Also about, how the temporality of language itself is inscribed, as, for example, enabling other people to speak and to be listened, as in the case of Papo Reto, and also the metaleptic temporality, this mode of looking at time retroactively and of transposing, extrapolating these temporal modes I think it's very interesting to think of current political struggles. We don't have time to discuss this, but Marielle also engaged with these, levels of horizontality, which are Papajeto and these like mourners gathering without, a clear economic agenda. Say, with, I mean, what I'm trying to say, these forms of collaboration that kind of bracket, some signs of inequality. So all this horizontal mode with the institutional mode, which is verticality. So Marielle was very, skilled in navigating these axes. And Marielle's case also point to this importance of auto-organization in the favelas. She is, we say, cria da maré, so she's a child from the maré, from the favela da maré, who became an elected politician and who is metaleptically still an important present figure in politics, which, is a place of, struggle for the state and for its resources. Okay, thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Danielle, for your presentation. It was great, it was very interesting. And you show your presentation two main features of the mourners' discourses that point in the engagement of hope, metaleptic temporality and Papajeto. And I was thinking when you were talking about the temporality, metaleptic temporality, the present still reverberate at the moment after 3 years of the tragic Marielle's death. And we saw some of the seeds planted and was, for example, last municipal election, we saw more councilwomen elected, and one example is Erica Hilton in São Paulo, the most woman trans councilwoman in São Paulo. She was the most voted in the country, and we see some relationship, for example, and the first feature for example, the temporality model, metaleptic temporality, we can see, for example, a kind of relationship with pedagogy of the church in the quotation mark. And sometimes we can see, for example, in the Papajeto, we can see a kind of a relationship of the Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed and pedagogy of hope on the Marielle's and the Moni's discourse. What do you think about it?
Yeah, very interesting point, Erica. I wish I had time to discuss that during the presentations, but it's great that you brought it up here. So, during Marielle's political upbringing, she was socialized in the Catholic Church. She was, I mean, still a pious woman, as is Imani, her friend. Of course, she's from a progressive section in the Catholic Church. We have the theology of liberation in Latin America, which, is partially responsible for the creation of the Partido dos Trabalhadores, the Workers' Party in the 1980s, and that is connected to the landless workers movements, etc. Paulo Freire, taught at the Pontifical Catholic University in São Paulo, which is, not from these I don't know how to say these irmandades, but from the diocese in São Paulo, which is connected to the theology of liberation and so on. So, I mean, what I want to say is that uh, religion plays an important role, in the workers' rights, workers' party movement, and also in these grassroots movements in Brazil. And it's very interesting that, this mourning movement itself, this idea of, calling Marielle a seed, calling her as, being present as a martyr, is somehow religious in the sense that, people are looking at the uncanny, they're looking at this transcendental world, so to speak, to kind of make sense of what's going on down here. So I think that, engaging with that requires a lot of attention, and I think requires a lot of, I would say, um, disposition to kind of get away with some prejudices that we, so to say, the seculars, the people who are profess ourselves as not being religious people, to understand what goes on in religion, and to understand that, these connections between secularism and religion are very, very neat. Um, um, I would say that, religion is part of, the core of politics today. In Brazil, we know that evangelicals, for example, are becoming more and more represented in the houses of parliament, and they have an agenda, and this second side is not part of the progressives, that Marielle identified with. And yet, these conservatives in the evangelicals, and also in many Catholic movements also are conservatives, are also, being represented in politics and, for example, supporting Bolsonaro, etc. But I think that, there are ways that we need to devise to engage with that, to understand what's at stake, what are the claims, which are the histories, which are the genealogies, and what are their aspirations, etc. So I would say that I'm very curious, to kind of uh, also dig more into that, into this mourning movement, and how religiosity plays a role, and how that maybe could point to certain aspects that we, in our secular formations could grapple to understand politics, and to perhaps translate to broader dialogues with, religion that is really becoming a major force in politics in Brazil now. Erica, I think your microphone is off.
Sorry. It's very interesting to think about these connections. It's interesting. So, Danielle, we don't have any questions at the moment for the audience. And if you want to say something about, you want to explain more about some slides you talk about, it's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would have not rushed if I knew that people, were so quiet today, because I had a lot to say. But I mean, I just want to, point out once more that last those aspects in the last slide. I may present it again just so we can look once more. What these partial conclusions, because I think that something very interesting that calls my attention is that when I went to the field for the first time in 2012 to the Complexo do Alemão, then this notion of survival was very, present in the discussions with the people in the favela. There is one informant, Rafael Calazans, who said that life in the favelas is part of a culture of survival, because people have been surviving inequality, surviving oppression, surviving poverty for centuries, because that dates back to the slavery and to how slaves were not embraced by the state when slavery was abolished in Brazil, and people, these descendants, these former slaves created the favelas. So the favelas in terms of housing are a very interesting sign of collectivity, because people squattered lands, they gathered land, and they built their own houses by themselves, and they created their own neighborhoods by themselves. The Complexo do Alemão, the Complexo da Maré are, examples of that. So that points, to these layers of horizontality that I was trying to make sense of earlier, and that are, very evident in the peripheries in Brazil, and elsewhere in the world. But I think that when I started looking at Marielle, I mean, after I knew her, after I met her in a couple of events, but especially so after her murder, because I had already started this project with Jerry Lee about hope. And I mean, Marielle pointed to a different aspect of it, because she knew all that. She knew about survival, she was had always been horizontal from the outset, because she participated in the collectives, in the Maré, in the pré-vestibular, this course for helping people to enter the university, in the NGOs, also her work with Marcelo Freixo. But at the same time, she went to PUC-Rio, to the Pontifical University in Rio to study sociology, which is an elite space. She became an elected politician, and she designed policy, which is an institutional mode that differs a lot from this, say, informal network of solidarity that takes place in the favela. So she was like a very interesting connection between these two layers, because and I think that it's important, to make sense of it, to also make sense of, because there is, there is another side of informality and of this horizontal layer, which is precarization at the same time, So in a sense, neoliberalism is there to say, well, you don't really need an office, you don't really need, regular labor, you don't need you only need a carteira verde amarela, this card for work here in Brazil, uh, green and yellow after the colors of Brazil, which mean you don't have any rights. because I mean, you can rely on your family, you can, you can survive by, the help of your friends, you can be like an entrepreneur, etc. So there is also this other side of informality, which is tied to precarity. And if you look at Marielle, she was trying to, kind of engage uh, horizontality, not in precarization, but in the institutionalization, of rights, of, as I mentioned here, like the struggle for the state, should the state be minimal or should the state, provide for services and also provide for the economy, provide for the well-being of the people, etc. How the institutions of the state should work, etc. So I mean, I think um, listening to this voice, of a black queer woman from the favela in politics is important because she could never naturalize it. She was framed as an outsider from the outset. She commented many times that if she went to the city hall without, attire, without, the conventional clothes for a councilwoman, she would be, dismissed as just like a regular woman. There's like a horrible event in which a security guard just stops her, and he yells at her, "Hey, what do you want here?" And then when she looks back and says, "Hey, it's me," and then there's all that discomfort, etc., and then she goes on to say, you cannot treat anyone like that. It's not because I'm a politician, it's, you cannot do it that to anyone, etc. So I mean, she could never naturalize, take it for granted, her being in the city council. And I think that, looking at this belonging, and as you pointed, these other minorities that have been elected after Marielle. Marielle has a major role in that, and she's also part of a moment in Brazil where we have been seeing change, in inclusion in the universities and in other spaces, and now in politics as well. So I think we have a lot to learn, from these institutional changes, from this critiques to naturalization that they afford, and also about this importance of institutions for social change, because I mean the access to some resources can only come from the state, from the institutions. So we have to understand this struggle better, I would say. So this is just, some further comments.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Daniel. We have some comments of Renata Maria dos Santos Ferreira. Queria dizer apenas que, até ouvir o professor Daniel, eu só pensava este luta por Marielle, como um movimento e um discurso para ocupar, ou não perde, espaço político, visto tamanha sua representação. Sua luta histórica parece que se tornou ainda mais forte depois de morta. Ela instrumentalizou a luta e nos instrumentalizou com sua figura em vida e depois. Obrigada, professor Daniel. Foi o que a Renata Maria Santos comentou.
Não, obrigado, Renata. Palavras lindas, né? E eu acho que é isso mesmo, né? Luto e luta, né, em português, são, né, sonoramente próximas, né? Mourning and struggle em inglês, né? Que não são tão próximas assim, mas semanticamente são próximas também. Enfim, então, obrigado. Palavras muito tocantes.
Well, Professor, we don't have any more questions, and we will finish this presentation now. So thank you very much for all presentation, for the discussion. It's very interesting to understand everything about what's happening in our country, and this is hope. This hope we can see. We saw, for example, last Sunday when it was the 3rd years of the 3rd years of the Marielle tragic death, and this is we are still waiting for answers, and not only we but our democracy are still waiting for the answers. So it's very interesting to see your presentation today, and we are still in this pandemic situation in Brazil. So we finish here the presentation, and thank you for all for your participation. And we invite you to follow the other presentations of the event, which are available on the YouTube channel of the Critical Language Policy Research Group at Federal University of Santa Catarina. See you next time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you, everyone. Bye.